Ladies and gentlemen, Habibis and Habibis, welcome to another episode of Technology in a Tent, brought to you by ArabNet and PITME. Today we have Super Charles, the second half of SofttechVC, and he's actually the second ass on the card, the one that's like jumping around. So is that really you jumping around? That's funny.
Something like that.
I love this card. The three asses of Softtech: the smart ass team, building a kick-ass product, and the big ass market. That's to live by when you're investing in seed stage startups. Charles, thanks for making time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hopefully this will be fun. Just to start with, tell us who's Charles. I've looked at your bio. You've been everywhere and you've done everything. And all of a sudden you're writing checks. So tell us how that happened and tell us, what's going on with you these days.
Sure. Yes, I was born in Detroit and grew up there for about 18 years. Then moved out to California for college. So I went to Stanford. And coming out of college, I'd worked at Internet 1.0 at Excite at Home, which... It's funny, way back then, we were scared of this big bad company called Yahoo that was like the world's scariest behemoth of the internet back in 1999. And it's funny what a difference 13 or 14 years can make in terms of...
big.
It's still big.
One of the most...
They're still a big global destination. And at the time, we were afraid of Yahoo like people are afraid of Google today. So it's...
Do you like the new Yahoo?
I'm super bullish for them. I had the chance to work at Google and know a bunch of my friends who've gone over there, and I think Marissa's got a great plan for the company, and I hope she turns it around.
Yeah, I like that they brought her on, and I'm not sold that this new look is going to do anything, but I like her mentality as far as changing product and look and she's, I think, in touch with this generation and this wave of companies. So hopefully they can do something, because it'd be a shame.
And I think the internet's a better place when you have multiple companies at scale competing. And I think allowing Google's had a great run. I used to work there. It's a fantastic place to be. But having, another big player with a big, strong destination in search and advertising, it's just good for the ecosystem. So I hope that she can invigorate Yahoo, because she's got tons of energy.
Marissa, we'd love to have you on the show. If you see this, this is an open invitation to come talk. You do, by the way, Marissa and Yahoo bought Maktub, which is the largest acquisition out of the Middle East. So, you have an audience and you have a product that is actually helping the Middle East. So we'd love to have you on the show. But anyway, so you've done gaming, you've done marketing, you've product. I mean, you've done a little bit of everything. Tell us, how did those experiences kind of prepare you for the VC world?
Sure.
And then I like to say, when did you join the dark side?
Yeah, so my first job out of college, actually, I was doing strategic investment for an arm of the U.S. government. It was pretty interesting job, my first exposure to venture. And there's two things I learned as a straight out of college venture capitalist. I was lucky enough to be on some boards as an observer, and I realized when we were in board meetings, there were some people who would talk where the CEO would you could see him sort of rolling his eyes or politely paying attention. And there were some people who, when they would talk, CEO would sort of stop what he was doing or she was doing and lean in and pay attention. I noticed the people who the CEOs listened to were the ones who had real-world operating experience or who'd been so successful as investors that they kind of had to pay attention. And it became really clear to me that as someone who had just graduated from school, no matter how smart I might have thought I was, there was a whole wealth of experiences in life I just hadn't had. And that in order to be a really helpful investor, I would really need to have that experience.
So you did like 10 different things?
So I did a lot of different things. And I remember when I was getting ready to wrap up my time at my VC fund, I asked my boss, who'd been the CEO of two publicly traded games companies. I said, what's the best preparation for being a CEO if I want to do that someday? When I was all of 24 years old. He goes, there's no preparation. You just have to do it. I go, come on, there must be some job that's a good preparation. He goes, not really. It's a pretty unique experience, and I highly encourage you to have it. But there's things you can do along the way to prepare yourself. You should understand how sales works. You should understand how product management works. You should understand how marketing works. You should understand how sort of back office ops work. You should gather all these skills so that your odds of success are as high as they possibly can be when you jump into it. And so that's why I've had a bunch of different jobs. So I ran a conference and events business around games. I ran a media publishing business with a friend. I was a product manager at an enterprise startup. I was a business development manager at Google. I started a company and ran that for a while. I've had a wide variety of experiences, but they've all been super useful in kind of rounding out just my business background.
Are you very technical?
I'm not. So I'm actually in the process of learning some Ruby, which has been fun.
Here's what I tell my wife. I'm like, if you find Ruby on Rails skills in a box over like a weekend, That would be the perfect Christmas present. Now, I can't write a line of code if my life depended on it, but I would assume, as an investor, it's important to have some skills or like be able to, be a little bit technical. So
it helps.
You want to learn?
So I want to learn Ruby mostly because I have a bunch of side projects I want to build for myself.
You have extra time on your hands?
None. It's funny. As an aside, we're big fans of AngelList and Crunchbase at SofTech, and we use those tools. And there's a bunch of actually private mashups I'd like to make for us. Where I'm like, oh, there's this data in AngelList, there's this data in Crunchbase. There's some cool stuff I'd like to be able to do with it. And Ruby and a few other languages would allow me to build some internal tools for our use that would do some cool stuff with that data. And I know we're not the only VC fund thinking of that, because I've met someone who has a hacker in residence. Yeah.
As a matter of fact, I know someone who's already built it.
Yes. They're not sharing it, though.
They're not sharing, or it's expensive. Maybe I'll get you like a VIP discount subscription, like beta, alpha, or something. But you know what? I saw it.
Yep.
And so what they built was really good visualizations of like who's connected to who, and, where's the money coming from, and it's just amazing. And I think they spent like 6 months building it.
Yep.
But for someone who's doing investments and connected to these companies, I think it's actually really, really useful to have a tool like that, especially when you're super busy and you don't always have time to do research. But okay, so you've done a bunch of things, right? How did the connection to Jeff happen, and when and how did you join?
So I've known Jeff for probably about 10 years now. So when I worked for my old VC fund, he was still at investing for Reuters Greenhouse. And he had long been interested in sort of consumer internet.
Yep.
And so our funds ended up looking at a lot of very similar companies. And I remember one day I saw him at a conference and he goes, hey, I'm leaving Reuters. I'm going to go do my own fund. I'm going to invest in Web 2.0. And I was like, this is 2004. I said, we just had this huge meltdown on the internet 4 years ago. Isn't everything done? And he's like,
Charles, don't worry, it will come back.
Right. and he sort of told me, he said, don't worry, the internet is not done yet. There's a bunch of cool ideas that weren't funded. And, I thought, wow, what a smart approach. But, I didn't pay any attention to what he was doing. And then slowly I started looking at his portfolio and I was like, oh, I went to college with that guy.
Amazing portfolio.
Fantastic.
I saw him at Starbucks the other day and he's like 143 or 4 investments, and then I spent some time just looking. I mean, Fitbit, Eventbrite, Fab. You obviously
and we have a bunch of others that are
literally. I didn't see a bad one. I mean, just as a bystander, I'm like, that's a bad investment. I don't like that product, and literally, partially it's because, and I was telling Stephanie this, like, Jeff is no fluff. Just gives it to you straight. He's very responsive, and I think he's the investor, like the entrepreneur's investor. Like he's not crazy all over the place like Dave, but he must be talking to hundreds and thousands of people to do that many investments.
I've had 2 jobs for the last 2 years, running my startup and being a partner at the fund. I think Jeff works harder at SofTech than any person I've ever worked with. And I've worked with some people who have unbelievable capacity for work. I've never seen anything like his ability to both just put in a sheer number of hours, but also wring the most energy and efficiency out of every hour that he puts in. And he's done a great job in building the SofTech brand. I feel pretty lucky to be a part of it.
And again, I connected with him early on at Founder Institute, and he was kind of a one-man army.
Yep.
And then when you and Stephanie joined, I realized, you guys are doing some good things. And I actually, not to cheerlead for you, but I think having you as an investor, says a lot, and it opens a lot of doors. So. It's smart money that's connected.
And I always joke, I said, before I joined SofTech did 20 to 25 deals a year. Since I joined SofTech does 20 to 25 deals a year. So I like to think that hopefully we're being a little bit more rigorous and thoughtful, but it's fun. And I think to your earlier point, we really try to position ourselves as the folks who will give you an answer. If we're not going to invest, we'll tell you. If we don't like what you're doing, we'll tell you. And that's one of those things where, to me, it's about being right in the long term. No entrepreneur wants to hear no. Up front, no one wants to hear, I don't actually think you can execute that distribution strategy. And one of 2 things happens. 6 months later, entrepreneurs sometimes come back and say, aha, I figured it out, you were wrong. And we're glad to have that conversation. And sometimes they come back and say, you know what, you were the 10th person who told me that my distribution strategy wouldn't work. And after hearing it from the 11th person, I decided that maybe 11 people are right. And we made some tweaks and changes. And can I come back and have a conversation with you? Because at least you told me something specific about why you didn't want to invest.
Which actually brings up a good point. My friend Mark from Beirut has a company called Sigli. He met you while he was here, and he was like, "Yeah, Charles is one of the few people that's given us good feedback, and although you probably aren't most likely not going to invest because they're there, but he was really excited about having met you and gotten feedback, and I think for some of the entrepreneurs in the Middle East, it's maybe difficult to hear certain things. Yeah. But the truth, if you can present it in a way where there's some sort of advice or structure that can help them, is very valuable. So I want to thank you, Mark. Charles, we'll look at your deal again.
Yeah, I'm glad it was helpful.
It's a work in progress. I don't know if you remember. It's crowdsourced news with the police scanner.
I do remember.
So, super good friend of mine. Anyway, so what was the actual... Like when you joined, or how did you join? Tell me a little bit about it.
So I'd been working for a company called Serious Business that made Facebook games. They were actually quite popular in the Middle East. A lot of our biggest players were actually in the Middle East, it turned out. And Zynga acquired that company, and as often happens, we had about 30 people, and for a small handful of the management team, there just weren't great opportunities for us at Zynga. So we explored that, and I and the head of engineering and the head of HR all sort of left and did something different. That was at the very time when a lot of the micro VC funds were starting to expand and were looking for new partners. And so I actually approached Jeff in the beginning just curious about what it was like to be at a seed stage VC fund, and he'd been doing it longer than anybody I knew. So I was starting to think about it. I had my own small but growing angel portfolio that was rapidly beginning to tax both my balance sheet and my calendar. And so we had a conversation about what it's like to work at a seed fund and how he ran Softtech. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And we just started talking, and we started looking at a handful of deals together. And the good news was, I wasn't really thinking about joining a VC fund, but I realized with Jeff, there were a few companies I'd gotten excited about, where he said, I see why you're excited about that. I've been doing this a little while longer than you have. Here's the 4 or 5 things you probably didn't ask them or think about. How are they going to solve X, Y, and Z? And I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. So he kept me out of a few. Really would have been probably interesting but bad investments. And I realized just at looking at stuff with him, we have similar worldviews, but we're sufficiently different that we can keep each other out of trouble. And I think, when you're looking for a partner in a VC fund, if you agree 0% of the time, you'll never get anything done. If you agree 100% of the time, one of you doesn't need to be there. So you want to be somewhere in the middle where you like enough of the stuff and you agree on what works, but there's enough sort of tension or disagreement that the stuff that you end up agreeing on is usually really interesting.
Are there patterns that you see where... now that you've looked at deals together, patterns of stuff that you both like or don't like, or patterns as far as the company pitches that seem to fall into your kind of realm of investments?
So we were big believers in the 3 S's rules. Team, product, and market.
3 S's. And
I think everybody in SofttechVC has their own balance. If you gave us each, 100 points to distribute across those 3 buckets, we'd all distribute them slightly different. I think Jeff has a very, very good product sense, probably stronger than I do, about looking at a very rough prototype or product and being able to connect the dots from the alpha to what the public product will be. I'm a sucker for team, and I've realized that about myself in the last year. I get really excited about people, even probably more so than product or market. So for me, I get really excited about the opportunity to work with really exceptional individuals. And so I think, everyone, Stephanie has her own sort of equation for what she looks at. I'd say the things that really get through our filter, it really ends up starting with, I'd say, market. If we can't get excited about the market, I think the one thing you learn as an entrepreneur, if you're in a market that doesn't work, you can be the world's most talented operator. There's very little you can do about that. That's trying to push water. You can't do it.
Interesting perspective. That's pretty cool.
And then I think people are probably the one thing where I'd say as a partnership you have the most conversation, because 3 people could meet the same entrepreneur and walk away with very different views on that person's personality, drive, likelihood for success, interpersonal dynamic, things like that.
And that's always important.
Oh, that's critical, because we'll be working with this person very closely for 5 to 7 years.
Yeah, it's like a term life insurance.
It's kind of like that.
Marriage, and I think people don't realize that it is like a marriage.
It is.
And the other day, jokingly, we said it's actually, I don't want to say worse than a marriage, but it's, you can't walk away.
You can't divorce your venture capitalist.
No divorcing. Although, your venture capitalist can divorce you.
Yes. It's a weird asymmetry.
People in the Middle East don't understand that people can get fired from their own company. So talk about that a little bit. Do you have maybe an example, or it doesn't have to be specific names, but you know, I don't think people realize that when you have a board and they don't like what you're doing, like, you know.
So I think, interesting as an investor, the companies where you find them where they were started from scratch, those are easy to evaluate because everything's new.
Yeah.
The hardest situations are the one where you find a group of founders who have been working on an idea for maybe a year or two, and you meet the company and you have the conversation, well, what are we going to do if after you guys get this money and start growing the company, what do we do if the founders, you guys stop getting along? Oh, we've never had a fight, or we've had tons of practice working through issues. Nothing will go wrong. And so we always say, well, let's talk about founder vesting, which for us is a really important concept, which is the idea that even as a founder, some of your stock, you basically have to earn it by being at the company for some period of time. And a lot of times you'll meet teams who aren't from Silicon Valley where they'll go, wait a minute, I'm a founder. I started this thing. Why should any of my stock be at risk? And we say, well, listen, if we put $2 million into the company as investors and help you grow it, and it turns out that maybe there's not a great role for your founder, or you need to take the company in a different direction that doesn't require both of you, it's very hard to have enough pie left over for the future employees if 30 or 40% of the company walks out the door when that person leaves. And that can be a really hard conversation, rivaled only by having to fire a founder. And it's a very difficult conversation to have.
I mean, a lot of people actually, recently, Andrew Mason was on the brink of fire from Groupon.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, you've got a company that's not doing as well as it should, or the stock's tanked. But I mean, that concept, I mean, to say I started this company, I'm founder and CEO, and I'm about to potentially get fired, that's got to be a hard pill to swallow, and that's got to be a hard conversation to have with someone that you have a relationship with.
It's extremely difficult, and I think people always forget one of the principal roles of in the United States of a board of directors is to evaluate the CEO and his or her performance, whether you should retain that person, whether you should fire them, whether you should try to provide them with coaching and resources to be more successful. That's a large part of your job as a board, and it can be uncomfortable at times, but like that's what we're here to do on behalf of all the other shareholders.
Are board meetings rough?
I think there's
when things are going bad, is it just like this gloomy like situation where you're like, you've got to hear more bad news, or like,
what I think are the most disconcerting board meetings that have a lot of bad news can be fine. If you walk into a board meeting and they say, wow, the competition is kind of kicking our butt right now, or this new thing happened in our market, we're not sure how to respond. Those can be really constructive because you come in, you roll up your sleeves, you say, okay, let's talk about the issue. What are we going to do to fix it? The ones that are most disconcerting is when the CEO's like, everything's going great.
And it's fluff.
And you look at the numbers or you listen to the presentation, you say, based on what you just told me, I don't think everything's going great. And you wonder, like, is this person just trying to put up a good face? Do they actually believe that things are going well, even though things are trouble? Those are the ones where you walk out and you go, gosh, something's up here.
Something's up, yeah.
Yeah.
And that sucks because, again, you have this responsibility, someone else's money, you're trying to perform, things don't always go like you thought they would. So as a founder, it's a lot of responsibility to wear on your shoulders.
And I think being the CEO of a venture-funded company is an extremely stressful job. It's extremely stressful. You've got investors you need to answer to, you've got employees who have questions, you've got the market, and you've got a lot of visibility oftentimes. There's reporters and press interested in the comings and goings. It's a very stressful job.
Yeah, and again, personally, I don't want to say I wouldn't want to be a founder of a venture-backed company, but to me, it's almost, I don't know, doesn't sound exciting. It sounds like a lot of responsibility. So
it's so fun, though.
It's fun.
It's like
I like the building and the actual company part of it. I just the part of taking more and more money and being responsible for more and more potential growth, and these board meetings, and meeting these milestones. It's just, we were just talking about it the other day. People building these billion-dollar businesses, right? There's a study done saying that your happiness in life after 5 million or something doesn't go up much, right? So I always tell people, I'm like, especially early founders or first-time founders, I'm like, instead of trying to do $1 billion exit, build something small, get a $5, $10, $15 million acquisition done. It'll be a lot easier for you to get meetings for the second one. You'll have your own money. And then you can really reevaluate like what the steps are, and the second time obviously it's easier. But a lot of those people then are, I think, in my eyes, less likely to take money early, or they take it for strategic reasons. So it's an interesting path, a lot of responsibility. So anyway, so we do this thing called Lessons Through Stories.
Yeah.
We have this board that we have, and it's a bunch of fun topics. And I think you had a chance to look at these, but our audience You guys know these by now. We switch them around a little bit. We're gonna come up with some new ones one of these days when they all have been answered. So, which one were you gonna tackle, or maybe one or two? Or
I think I'll do. I'll pick two. I'm gonna pick this one, worst pitch ever.
Okay.
And not to pick on the person who did this pitch, but more just to talk about in general. And I'll do another pivot because that's one that actually comes up for us a lot at the seed stage.
Okay.
So worst pitch ever. I'll tell you a little something about VCs that I've observed from my peers. We have long attention spans once we're interested, and very short attention spans until we're interested. And so when someone's pitching me, the sooner I can get my head around what the product is, who the customer is, why it matters, my brain gets engaged. Until then, I'm kind of treading water in a lot of pitches. So I always like to understand, for me first, and everyone varies, I always like to thank you very much. For me, I like to start off with team. If I'm like, if we're going to spend the next hour together, rather than jumping right into the product or market, tell me who you are and like your background and how the 2 or 3 of you founders know each other, because that helps give me context about why you are or are not the right team to tackle this opportunity.
Yep.
And then just as soon as possible, make it really clear for me what the product is, how it works, and why it matters. And I had someone come in, and very, very bright founder, working on a relatively technical product, and he started explaining to me what the product did. And 5 minutes went in, and I scribbled some notes to myself. I'm writing down, what does this thing do? ? And he kept talking, and I'm like, well, maybe he'll get to it in the next couple slides. A few more slides went by. I just put a couple more dots after the question mark. 15 minutes, and I finally raised my hand. I said, I don't want to be rude. I don't understand what your product does. And he's like, oh. And he proceeded to go to the whiteboard and draw it. And I said, no, I understand the diagram, but I don't actually understand what it does, for whom, and why that matters. And he's giving me a very strange look. And he went back to the whiteboard and like drew the arrows more emphatically. And I said, I don't get it. Like, you've explained this product to me 3 times. It's in a broad area where I understand the technology and where I understand, but you haven't actually articulated your product to me in a way that I get it. But you can continue on with the pitch. I'm just saying, like, at this point, I still haven't gotten it.
You haven't even gotten. I'm already lost. So Adele used to say this one pitch ad lib thing. My name is. My company is. We do this with the secret sauce.
Yes.
And keep it simple, stupid, right?
Yeah.
And I can tell you, it is very hard for a lot of people to actually say it in one sentence. For you, and if you can't, a lot of times, you've missed that opportunity, or you haven't gotten their attention. Obviously, in an hour-long meeting, you should definitely be able to articulate what you're doing. But I've seen probably 2,000 or 3,000 companies as well.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of them where literally, like, at the end, I'm like, what is this?
Yeah.
And it's sad because I'm sure, again, the founder is bright and there's probably something there, but if you can't articulate it, not only have you potentially wasted someone's time, you've missed an opportunity to potentially find an investor or partner.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you can't keep it simple, stupid, then you're again wasting everybody's time in a sense. So.
And it was frustrating for me because I didn't know how to articulate to him
without like.
Well, I didn't articulate to him, like, you haven't actually explained to me, like, the product and market that you're going after and why this is actually a big idea. And I'm like, if you can't explain it to me, how are you going to explain it to your customers, to the market, to everyone else? Because you have my attention. You have the ability to...
You have to be able to grammify it.
Yes.
Grammify it, yeah. So if your grandma understands it, then people will understand as well. So, okay. So that was the worst pitch.
There's another related thing to that too, though, which is that the hardest thing, and I'm still working on the art of expressing this to entrepreneurs, sometimes someone will come in with a load of data about a market where I just have no perspective. And a few times I've had people come in and I'm like, you clearly understand the market you're going after. You know everything about it. I just don't get your market. And then their natural instinct goes, all right, well, let me go through the total addressable market side again. It's 30 billion. I say, I agree. It very well might be. I just don't have the familiarity with your market and your space to know whether it's really that big, whether what you're doing is unique, and you would be better served by finding an investor who's familiar with the broad space that you're in. Consumer internet, Jeff, Stephanie, and I do those all day long. There's a lot of spaces there where we have familiarity on the competitive landscape and what the market looks like and how you acquire customers. But there's some segments where no matter what, people tell me things and I'm just like, wow, you've done a great job of laying out the case. I'm just not familiar enough with your market to A, be excited, and B, to understand how you fit in the landscape.
Does that number actually mean anything when someone says our market is 30 billion or 50 billion or 20 billion, or do you think it's fluff?
For me, the real question is, how big is the market for what you're doing? Sometimes people will say such and such is a $100 billion market. I'm like, well, it's probably not addressable by a startup if it's really a $100 billion market. Now, if you're Airbnb, you might be actually going after a market in terms of rentals, but most things, it gives you some sense.
Airbnb.
They're not an Airbnb.
No, I hear we have a $100 billion market, and all we need to get is 1%. I'm like,
those pitches scare me.
Those pitches, exactly.
Those pitches scare me. I'm like, that's not how. If you're successful, you'll have more than 1% of the market, and it's probably not $100 billion addressable to you.
Exactly. So that's a good point. Okay, so another pivot?
Yeah, so this is the other thing that I've been spending a lot of time with, not so much our portfolio, but other friends of mine who are starting companies, is I think the great thing about pivots are that if you have a team and they're working well together, but the market or product you built first just doesn't catch on with customers, it's acceptable to, within the structure of that same company, try something different.
Sure.
I do think, though, there's a time and a place for letting go. And I think I've seen some teams where they started off doing something that was really consumer-oriented, and they pivoted into something that was very business-to-business oriented. And I asked one of these teams, I said, well, do you think you have the right engineering and co-founding team to go after this new market? Yeah, these guys are great. Not asking if they're great, but if you were starting the company that you're running right now from scratch today, would this be the team you want? Maybe not that guy, maybe not her in marketing, and maybe not her in product, and maybe not him in engineering. And you go, do you have the right set of investors around the table? Well, if we knew we were going to do B2B, we probably would have gone out and gotten a different set of people. And I think sometimes there's just a time when you have to say, with this group of people and this group of investors in this construct, we've given it our best shot. And the right thing to do is to shut the company down. And that could be returning money to investors. That could be, unfortunately, sometimes there's no money to return. But I think there's a time to pause and reflect and step back and kind of think about what you learned and what didn't work. And if you want to reconstitute a new team, do it from scratch.
Are you familiar with Elastic? Still in them?
I don't know those guys.
So they were doing something, don't quote me on this, but something around rounding off to do, like when you do charges, rounding off your charges to do something with it, right? Obviously, I don't know if it wasn't a nonprofit, but it was something.
It was the give to charity?
Something like that.
Kind of like, there's a couple folks we've met who were doing this.
So they did that, and they raised money from investors, and then obviously they realized that it wasn't the right model, and so now they're doing sales as a service. So they built a platform to help startups with sales, so B2B sales. Now, the funny conversation we had was, he's like, dude, I have to go to my investors who aren't really excited about this and explain to them that we're pivoting to something completely different. And, what happens at that point, also what as a byproduct, is that smart money that's put in money into your company because of potentially opening doors and connections, all of a sudden isn't smart anymore because it's not their market.
It's not their market.
In your case, you guys do mostly consumer. But if someone was to switch to enterprise, that wouldn't be as exciting for you guys, right? So,
it's funny, one of our most successful portfolio companies had a major pivot, and that was Fab. I mean, they were doing something very different when we invested, but that's the case where when Jason and Bradford explained to us what they wanted to do, they had a pretty strong argument as to why that particular team was well suited to go after that opportunity, and it made sense. Not every pivot that our portfolio or other people's portfolios pitch to us makes as much sense.
Do you think all pivots make it? I mean, do you see pivots that make it worse, where they end up even going down further into the...
It's funny. I think when you're an operator or an entrepreneur, you think your company... Maybe it's not perfect, but you think it's really good. You think it's amazing. You think you have the best people, the best ideas. You think everything's great. Sometimes when you're on the outside, you look at a team and you go, gosh, these guys, they work really hard. But it just whatever they're doing might not be in the cards for them. And I guess I don't have children, but I imagine it's like being a parent. You watch your kid play soccer. You're like, my kid's a pretty good athlete, but maybe soccer is not the right sport for them. And sometimes you'll see teams that pivot and you're like, you guys gave it a great run. Maybe you should all think about doing something different. Doing something different. And I think as an investor, it's a very hard, like we're not in the business of telling our companies when they should pivot.
Sure.
If we think what they're doing isn't working, we'll tell them. And sometimes it's just like they're using the wrong tactics. They're in the right market, the right product, just the sales strategy is wrong, or the customer acquisition costs are too high, or something else about it isn't working. But I as an investor, I don't view it's my job to come in and say, you guys should pivot because what you're doing doesn't work.
Interesting. That's funny. Okay, another pivot. We do this thing at the end called old rules.
Yep.
So Bill Maher does new rules, old rules. Like, what are the 2 rules that you live by yourself, and what do you like people to kind of abide by as far as dealing with you?
I guess the big one for me, especially as an investor, and I try to do this in my personal life too, is don't bury the bad news.
Okay.
Don't the number of times where I've had a conversation with someone 45 minutes in, we're about to wrap up, and they go, oh, by the way, there's this one thing. Yeah. My co-founder wants to quit. And you're like, wait a minute, like, why wasn't that the lead? Like, don't bury the lead. Like, that's a really important, albeit awkward thing. And like, let's just get to that stuff sooner so that we can solve it. And I think in startups and in relationships and other things, sometimes there's a tendency to hide the bad news or sugarcoat it and just think like, well, if I don't talk about it, it'll go away.
It's not lying, right?
It's not lying. It's just, it's like, if I don't talk about it, it might go away. In startups, the bad things you don't talk about, they don't magically solve themselves.
They actually get worse.
They get worse. Yep. And we don't get mad. Unless it's like fraud or something. Like, we don't get mad if you're like, hey, me and my co-founder just aren't getting along, and it's driving me crazy. I'm like, that happens in startups. You're not the first person to go, let's talk about that. Or, we've pitched 100 people and they've all said no, and it's driving me crazy. Okay, well, that's fine. That happens. Let's talk about...
Colonel Sanders pitched to I don't know, for his Kentucky Fried Chicken recipe, 200, 300 people.
Read the story of Evernote and Phil Libin. I mean, there's some great stories of people who had to pitch a lot of people to get a bite. So that's one that's really important to me. And I think one of the big lessons I've definitely learned from working with Jeff is, and it's related to sort of don't bury the bad news, which is, I think, focus on long-term relationships. And when I meet entrepreneurs where I think that the thing that they're doing is not interesting to us, but I like the people, I will tell them, like, we're not going to invest in your business, and here's why. But I hope if you do something different, or the next time you have a startup, or if you pivot, please come back and pitch us, because I liked meeting you and I liked your interaction. And we mean it. We don't say that to every single entrepreneur we meet. We say it to the ones where we really do mean it. And I think sometimes that means, saying no to a rock star team where you're just not excited about the thing. The funny thing I tell people sometimes is, before I joined SofttechVC, I pitched Jeff on an idea. He's like, that's a terrible idea. And he'll tell you, he goes, that's a terrible idea. I would not fund you to join SofttechVC to do that. And he was right. It was not a good idea. And it took us about a month, me and my co-founder, about a month to realize this isn't a good idea. And so we didn't do that.
So when Jeff drops knowledge, listen.
When he drops knowledge, listen. Absolutely.
But ultimately, this kind of theme is, keep it real.
Yep.
And don't fluff. And at the end of the day, look, the point is that when someone hears a few thousand pitches, over a period of how many days or months or years, they kind of know what they're talking about. And so, look, that doesn't mean Jeff is going to understand or like, or you guys are going to like or understand everything. But I think what you said about connecting with the team behind it. A lot of those relationships years later turn out to be a reference or maybe an investor.
Yeah.
So keeping those alive is really important. So that's something.
One of our little things that we sort of try to keep track of is we get a fair number of referrals from people that we turn down. People who pitched us. We didn't invest. We'll get them saying, hey, I want you to meet my friend. And which to me is a good signal that at least we're doing something right. Where even the people where we tell them, like, hey, we're not interested in what you're doing for these reasons, that impression that they had from dealing with us is good enough that they'd still want to send other folks who they think are doing interesting stuff our way. Because
that's actually funny, because in the sense, that makes your life a little bit easier, potentially, right? And especially if it's the ones that you like or respect or just have a good connection with, because your life as it is pretty hectic, having to meet and get pitched. But if these warm referrals actually make your life easier.
Yeah, they do. So. And I think there's some VCs who have a sense that, like, well, if I just give people the soft no and never say no, or never tell people why, like, that's the nice thing to do. It's not helpful as an entrepreneur. If you've ever, I think that's one of the big things you learn when you're raising money yourself. Not hearing anything is stressful.
maybes are worse than
maybes are, and nothing eventually turns into a no. But it's nice to have closure, to have someone say, "Hey, I'm sorry." And I wish I could say 100% of the time that we get back to everybody. Our goal is sort of 2 weeks. It doesn't happen, and when it doesn't happen, I feel terrible.
Charles, how many emails do you get a day?
Hundreds.
Honestly.
Hundreds.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, Jeff probably gets a deal. I know was doing like 1,000 a day, and it's a lot of work.
It is.
And so don't take it personal. Everybody wants to help. Everybody wants to invest, but if it's not right, it's not right. And sometimes you don't have time to really explain and then go back and forth because it's time consuming. Anyway, so you heard it here. Keep it real. No fluff, and just keep marching. And if Jeff or Charles or anybody says no, they know what they're talking about, but don't give up. And maybe there's someone who can support you. Anyway, Charles, appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me in the tent.
We have something here for you.
Oh, very nice.
I hope it's the right size. We are a bootstrap startup. I think you're a medium, but
yeah, that'll work. Oh, very nice.
But
I like
we're a bootstrap startup here.
It's cool.
And so maybe you can sport this once in a while and cheerlead for us. But
I would love to.
And please tell Jeff that we'd love to have him on the show too.
I think if he'd seen the tent, he'd be here today. This is a pretty awesome setup you have here.
We'll send him a picture.
Yeah.
Can we get a warmer photo? I already told 70. No, but I'm sure we'll make some time to connect with him because Jeff, in some ways, is kind of one of the godfathers of early stage investing, and so I've talked and met with him a bunch of times. Never pitched him, by the way. But always really good input, always really good feedback, and he does keep it real all the time.
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
perfect.
Peace, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time.